The crescent moon hung in the sky, a cold eye watching the desolate road stretch through the remote countryside. Rows of tall birch trees, their white trunks like ghosts, raised bare branches to the sky, scattering bizarre shadows on the asphalt. The patrol car moved slowly, the engine's steady hum like the ticking countdown of a horror story. Tonight, the false tranquility was just a thin veil concealing a terrifying reality. Officer Jack Harris, a middle-aged man with a careworn face and sunken eyes, was used to the dull patrol nights in this area. But tonight, there was a difference. A deathly silence enveloped everything, a silence that he knew all too well, usually a harbinger of something terrible to come. And then his gaze froze. The patrol car's headlights reflected a faint glimmer on the roadside grass. A car, parked precariously, half its body lost in the dense darkness of the woods. A cold feeling spread through his body. Instinct told him something was wrong. Something very, very wrong. Jack stopped the car, took the flashlight from the trunk. His footsteps sounded heavy on the dirt road. Approaching cautiously, he saw that the driver's side door was wide open, like a brazen invitation into the deep darkness of the forest. A foul odor hit him, acrid and rotten, like the smell of decaying flesh mixed with damp earth and fallen leaves. His stomach clenched, a feeling of nausea rising. The flashlight shone into the car, revealing a disgusting mess. Tissues, rags, fast food wrappers scattered on the floor, all stained with a gruesome dark red. A swarm of flies buzzed, landing thickly on the dried bloodstains. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat like an alarm bell. Slowly moving to the back of the car, he saw something wrapped carefully in blood-soaked paper. A large package with a bizarre shape. He put on rubber gloves, the coldness of the rubber on his skin unable to dispel the chill spreading in his heart. Each layer of paper was unwrapped, slowly, cautiously, as if peeling a layer of skin from his own body. And then it appeared, a distorted, horrifying form. A hand, soaked in blood. The fingers were contracted, as if trying to cling to lost life. The skin was pale, beginning to decompose. The cuts were jagged, uneven, as if done by a madman. A shiver ran down his spine, from the back of his neck to the tips of his toes. He stood frozen in place, unable to move. A feeling of disgust and fear surged, engulfing him in a dark abyss. He dry heaved, but nothing but bitter gastric juice came out. The foul odor clung to him, haunting him to the core, like a curse. The officer immediately reported. His voice trembled as he read the descriptions of the horrific scene. The wail of sirens tore through the night, echoing through the forest, signaling a terrible crime, a gruesome act. The lights from other police cars shone into the forest, breaking the silent night. Every nook and cranny, every bush was searched, but the darkness was too deep, too thick. The fugitive had disappeared, vanishing into the night like a demon, leaving behind a horrifying scene and countless unanswered questions. Who had done this? Why? And to whom did this hand belong? The car was towed away, carrying the gruesome evidence. The forest returned to its original stillness, but this stillness had been tainted, defiled by crime. In Jack Harris's mind, tonight would forever be a never-ending nightmare. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bloody hand, the contracted fingers, the jagged cuts. The moon still shone, a cold eye watching the ghosts lurking in the darkness, waiting for another victim, another night, another horror story. And Jack knew, deep in his heart, that his job, whether he wanted it or not, was to face those ghosts, to lift the veil of darkness concealing the most horrific crimes of humanity. But did he have the strength to do it? Could his conscience endure what he would have to see, what he would have to experience? That question haunted him, like a ghost that would never leave. Night fell, a thick darkness engulfing the remote countryside. The patrol car rolled slowly along the bumpy dirt road, heading towards the dilapidated house tucked deep in the shadows. Tonight's mission: to find a subject who had absconded from electronic monitoring. A seemingly simple task, but one that carried an ominous sign from the start. As the car stopped in front of the house, a terrifying silence enveloped everything. The dim moonlight wasn't enough to dispel the darkness, only casting eerie shapes on the crumbling walls. The two police officers, Martin and Davis, silently got out of the car. Martin headed towards the front door, while Davis took position on the side of the house, his eyes glued to the dark windows. The sound of knocking echoed in the night, but there was no answer. A feeling of unease rose in Martin's chest. He knocked harder, and then a faint sound came from inside. The door creaked open, and a middle-aged woman slowly stepped out. Her face was pale, her eyes blankly staring at Davis, who was standing on the side of the house. An indescribable strangeness. Why wasn't she looking at the person standing at the door, but instead looking towards the blind spot? Davis felt a cold chill run down his spine. Something was very wrong here. After being asked about the person they were looking for, she mumbled something incomprehensible, then suddenly knelt down, crawling on the floor, constantly calling the name Camille. A bizarre act, an unexplainable madness. Martin and Davis exchanged glances. They knew this mission had gone beyond expectations. Stepping inside the house, they felt a heaviness, a gloom enveloping everything. The faint light from a single light bulb wasn't enough to dispel the darkness. The rooms were cramped, cluttered, without a single electronic device. A musty, foul smell hit them, making it difficult to breathe. She continued to crawl on the floor, constantly calling the name Camille like a soulless puppet. Martin and Davis split up to search the house, but the more they searched, the more lost they felt. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, the rooms changing shape in a strange way. They felt like they were trapped in a maze with no exit. Then they reached the top floor. A door led to an attic room. The door seemed to have been locked tightly, paint covering all the gaps. After a struggle, they managed to open the door. Inside was a dark, damp space, full of old objects and rolls of fiberglass insulation. A cold feeling enveloped them. She was still sitting at the foot of the stairs, staring at them, constantly calling the name Camille. Martin and Davis exchanged glances. They couldn't find anything here. They decided to leave. As they stepped out of the house, she stood right in front of the door, her blank eyes following them. A grotesque smile spread across her lips. Martin and Davis shuddered. They quickly got in the car, leaving this hellish place. According to the radio log, they were only in that house for about 20 minutes. But in their perception, time seemed to stretch endlessly. They didn't know what was more terrifying: the woman crawling on the floor, calling the name Camille, the sense of getting lost in the strange house, or her grotesque smile as they left. One thing was certain: they would never return to that place again. Darkness still shrouded the house, hiding terrifying secrets, waiting for the next victims. The July sun blazed down on the barren Georgia landscape, but couldn't thaw the cold that gnawed at Bob's soul. He and his partner received a call to an abandoned house, nestled between Macon and Roberta. A place long forgotten, a black dot on the map, a place even criminals avoided. A seemingly routine call, yet from the outset, it carried an unsettling feeling, as if an invisible hand were tightening around his heart. When the patrol car pulled up to the house, silence enveloped everything, a silence so oppressive it was suffocating. Even the cicadas, the characteristic noise of a southern summer, were silent. The harsh sunlight couldn't penetrate the dense foliage, leaving the house shrouded in a gloomy darkness, like a gaping maw about to swallow everything. An elderly man sat listlessly on the front steps, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his faded jacket. His head was bowed, his sparse hair falling over his face. Bob approached and realized the man's shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. Muffled sobs, meaningless murmurs escaped his throat like a prayer for a lost soul. A man utterly broken, shattered to the core. Earl, with his years of experience, called for backup. Bob, his anxiety escalating, drew his familiar Glock pistol from its holster and cautiously approached the house. A foul odor assaulted his nostrils, pungent and repulsive, like a warning of the horrors that awaited him inside. The smell of rot, of decay, of death. He called out, but only his echo responded, a chilling reverberation in the deathly silence. His heart pounded in his chest, like a crazed bird trying to escape. He moved towards the hallway, where the stench was strongest, drawn in like a moth to a gruesome flame. He opened the bedroom door, and then he froze. Two corpses lay on the cramped, old bed. Their skin was gray, taut like balloons about to burst. Flies swarmed, forming a black, writhing coating. He struggled to swallow the nausea churning within him. Moving closer, he saw them more clearly. A male corpse, a female corpse. Their faces were beginning to decompose, their features distorted to the point of horror. Flies crawled in and out of their mouths, wriggling in their empty eye sockets. And then he saw it. In the woman's arms, a small, lifeless form, an innocent soul. A baby. The skin was blue-purple, stiff like an abandoned doll. A large, glistening cockroach crawled out of the baby's mouth, crawling across its small, vacant face. He collapsed, unable to bear it any longer. Rushing out of the house, he vomited on the lawn, the contents of his stomach mingling with his terror. The man on the steps remained shaking, like a soulless husk. When the backup arrived, they learned the horrifying truth, the story behind this tragic death. The man was a coworker of the deceased, working together at a peach packing plant. They were drug addicts, addicted to heroin. The baby had died of starvation, neglected in the carelessness of the addicts. They died of an overdose of despair. Bob returned home, but he was no longer the Bob he once was. He showered, scrubbing his skin raw, but he couldn't wash away the haunting stench, the smell of death and despair. He tried to eat, but he couldn't swallow anything. The food caught in his throat like a curse. He drank, hoping to find oblivion, but the image of the baby still haunted him, growing clearer with each passing day. He still worked as a police officer, still wore his uniform, still carried his gun. But he was no longer the Bob of those early days, with his noble beliefs and ideals. He drank more to forget what he had seen, what he had experienced. He became more withdrawn, retreating into an invisible shell. He had nightmares every night, terrifying nightmares that suffocated him. He saw the baby crying, plaintive cries echoing in the darkness, reminding him of the cruelty and hopelessness of this world. That night, I received a call to a small house in the suburbs, where a young woman frantically reported a break-in. The window was shattered downstairs, but nothing seemed to be missing. She couldn't find anyone in the house, but then, as she went upstairs to prepare for bed, she heard footsteps lurking below. The call abruptly cut off, and all attempts to call back were futile. My heart tightened. Alone in the dead of night, I approached the house. The knock echoed in the silence, but no one answered. The doorbell also faded into the stillness. Unease rising, I decided to go around and inspect the scene. The window was shattered, large enough for a person to easily crawl through. I shone my flashlight into the dark, gaping interior, calling out, announcing the presence of the police. Still not a sound. Contacting dispatch, I reported the situation, but couldn't wait any longer. A sense of lurking danger compelled me to act. I climbed through the broken window, cautiously stepping into the kitchen, the sound of shattered glass crunching beneath my feet, tearing through the night. Gun drawn, I slowly advanced up the stairs, trying not to make too much noise, but still announcing my presence. The upstairs was eerily silent. I followed the hallway to a partially closed room. Moonlight filtered through the crack, enough for me to make out a figure huddled on the bed, shrouded in darkness. "The girl," I softly asked, my voice trembling, if she was okay. She replied, her voice off key, that she was fine. But her eyes, her pale face, and her trembling hands betrayed a different truth. I understood something was going on. A dark secret was hidden in this room. My eyes quickly scanned the room, lingering on the closet, then glancing down at the space under the bed. She shook her head slightly, then nodded. A silent message, a secret plea for help. My heart pounded. The decision had to be made immediately. I told her to sign a report, a pretext to get her out of the room. When she approached, I quickly pushed her outside, drew my gun, and shouted, ordering whoever was hiding under the bed to reveal themselves. A dark figure slowly crawled out, raising both hands above its head. The clatter of metal echoed as he discarded his weapon. A gun. He was dressed in black from head to toe, his face hidden in the shadows. I arrested him, escorting him outside, just as my colleagues arrived. Later, I learned that when she heard the footsteps upstairs, the girl had managed to hang up the phone, afraid the intruder would hear it. He had pointed a gun at her, threatening to kill her if she dared to make a sound. When I knocked, he hid under the bed, forcing her to pretend that nothing was happening. Just a moment's delay, a moment's hesitation, and perhaps it would have been too late. The darkness had almost swallowed them both. Evil had lurked just under the bed, ready to steal lives and sow terror. That night, I faced a nightmare, a reminder of the dangers that always lurk in the shadows, waiting for their chance to rise.